Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another much-needed conversation on the Diversity Roundtable. I'm your host, Nqobile Pamela Xaba, and today's episode couldn't be more timely. We are unpacking a topic that sits at the very heart of effective governance and leadership. The boardroom is not a war room for operations. It is the compass for direction. That is our topic for this afternoon. And I'm just really, really so blessed and honored that we have a most amazing individual today as our guest who's really joining us, who's donated her time to share her experience, to share her wisdom. So before I introduce her, I just really want to give context to this topic. And really, it goes that boards don't run companies. They ruin them when they confuse strategy with execution. A board that dives into operations is not governing, it is meddling. Those are not my words, but you'll get to hear soon how we came about this topic. And when that happens, purpose gets lost, value erodes, and leadership loses direction. So today, as I said, we are honored to have with us a voice of clarity and conviction, Kantha Naicker, a respected governance leader, mentor, and advocate for ethical, strategic board leadership. Kantha, welcome to the Diversity Roundtable. We are so excited to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, Pam, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much. I've been a big fan and I've always wanted to be on your podcast, so I'm here. And we're going to talk about this thing that I wrote about on LinkedIn, which
Yes.
is where you picked it up from.
Absolutely, and thank you for prompting me on that context because, one would ask, how do we come up with these topics? And actually, I've been following you for a long time and you know this, and I've reached out to you. And when I saw your post with this topic, the boardroom is not a war room for operations, I thought, oh my, what is going on here? There must be a deeper context that we need to unpack. And I thought, let me just reach out because I know that other than you being the CEO of GovernX, you are also a board member of our recently formed NPC, which is called Inspired Growth. And thank you so much for donating your time on this cause. But let's come back to today's topic. And just, introduce yourself briefly, Kantha, for our audience. And really, the reason why we started the Diversity Roundtable is really to give access to young professionals, up-and-coming entrepreneurs, mainly from underserved communities, so that they, can have an opportunity to engage and listen to, your experience and your story, your joys, your wins, your challenges, and the triumphs along your journey, because ordinarily they wouldn't have an opportunity to engage with experienced leaders like yourself. So we are just really paying it forward, and thank you for availing yourself. So give us context. Let me keep quiet into who you are, maybe a bit of a personal story that you would like to share, that you are comfortable to share, and then we'll kick the discussion. Over to you.
Sure. So you've introduced me. I'm Kantha Naicker. I'm an accountant for my sins. That's a 25-year journey. But as a result of that, being an accountant and having got my first board position, not quite by accident, but being asked to put myself forward, I entered the governance fray and then so started learning. And it was a very steep learning curve. And I always say to my students or anybody else that asks, how do you get onto a board? Why do you, and I'm like, I got onto a board because I was asked to be on the board. And then I spent my 2 terms. I've ended up being vice chairperson of a board, chairing a board. I chair a board currently, working across the continent. And so just getting to understand people, because boards are people, right? So we're still individuals, but we sit as a group of people to make a decision. So that it fascinated me. And about a year ago, more than a year ago, I had somebody challenge me and say, why aren't you consulting on governance? You know all of these things. And why aren't you writing? Because from the conversation we're having, you're clearly very passionate about this. And so what I write about, and this particular piece that I wrote was prompted by something that somebody had spoken about. And I thought, I have to write about it because it happens more often than not. And unfortunately, We see it happening regularly from a South African perspective. I think globally as well. But because I've centered a lot of what I write about in that happens in South Africa and across the continent, I want people to sit back and ask themselves, what role am I playing? So yeah, I'm an accountant, I'm a governance strategist. I won't call myself an expert. I think we're constantly learning. I forayed into some foresight strategy as well, because I really do believe we should be scanning horizons constantly to see what's going to hit us next if it's not COVID. But in all of that, it's governance. Which really does stem from your own personal life. And if you take that and you continue that into a very formal setup, I mean, and I'm not even talking listed boards, right? They have their own regulations, etc. But when you get asked to serve on a board, what do you do? How do you do it? And what you should and shouldn't do? And there are a lot of boards who are doing things they shouldn't be doing. So hence this reach of this particular post of about 13,500 hits or whatever it is, and very, very rich discussion on LinkedIn as a result of this post, which was a whim on a late Sunday night or Saturday morning, and Monday morning, and I just wrote it, and then suddenly everybody was engaging. So clearly, it's something that needs to be spoken about.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that broader context. And indeed, I think you really live your truth, because, you really practice what you preach and you share your knowledge with the world. And I do agree with you, considering, the reach that this post had on LinkedIn, that it's really a much needed dialogue, which is what really prompted me, as I said earlier, to actually, reach out to you and say, let's have a deeper discussion in terms of, what sits here and what is this about. So let's continue. And thank you so much for framing this. Let's continue, let's now dig deeper and set the scene, and we'll really term this segment, the state of governance. Today, so let's start here, Kantha. Many boards today are overstepping into management territory, as you have explained, and sometimes, and some of the examples is like approving invoices, attending operational meetings, or even directing staff, or even directing employees, and I've seen this, also in my experience. So, but in your experience, how did we get here? Can you unpack this for us? What has blurred the line between governance and operations?
So I think we've stuck in a rut between what's happened historically with what governance stood for, what we thought governance stood for, because boards were built a lot under around control. So there was the board; it was a them and us. There's the board; they control the company. The buck stops with them, and then there's operations. And so that feeling or that notion of control, I think, is what got us into trouble, because some boards become very operational, and then still became and are, in terms of ensuring that the work gets done. But that shouldn't be the case, because the board is there to appoint the CEO. The CEO appoints his team. And so you have him or her, and so I'm saying him, but him or her, because there should be more her CEOs, and that the board has now started to look at things that it needs, like, directing the person on whether they need to be approving invoices is just out. It shouldn't even be done, because it means that you've appointed somebody and you don't have the trust in that person to carry out that task. So how did we get here? I think over time, and it's, governing is, if we go back to what is governance, it comes from a Greek word, I can't pronounce it, but it's to govern, to guide, to steer. And so when we look at where we've come from, we've overplayed that definition of what governance is. And that's why we're sitting where we are, because people think more than steering, we need to be doing. You're not doing. The body's in place to make sure that they are governing and steering and correcting and slapping people on hands if needs be. So when I think about it, I think boards think they need to be busy. Now, to be busy, all you need to do is follow board calendar and make sure that you follow what needs to be done within that board calendar. You need to approve financials, you need to approve policies, you need to make sure the CE is doing his or her job. You need to make sure that you're scanning the horizon for risks. You need to make sure that you are aware of what's happening geopolitically, as we are in today's world where things change at the snap of a button. So I think boards they forget their strategic role, and then they go into firefighting because something happens and it gets brought to their attention and they think, oh, this person can't do the job, we can do a better job. And more so where you have a little bit of self-interest on boards, because if you look at membership bodies are made up of more of members. And so they think they know better, right? Or accountants know better than the CFO, or attorneys know better than the legal person that's sitting there making the operational decision. So boardroom should act like this. And I know, we see this in movies sometimes in the US, and hopefully this is happening now with all of the decisions that they're making. But they sit in a war room, and in that war room, you've got to now make quick decisions. And that becomes very emotionally charged, because now you're making a decision. It has to be quick on the go, but you've got to have the data. And if that doesn't happen, then you dig into the detail. So for me, boards that do that, it's governance is not about control. Governance is about making sure that you guide and you steer. And that's what we've lost, because people think that they can do better than. You're not there to do, you're there to guide and steer. So when you're trusting the system and you're trusting the data and you're trusting the people that give you that information, then you're not going to double guess whether that information that's coming to you is correct or not. Then you're going to say, yes, I accept what's coming. Now let's use that information and see how we can take it. So for me, boards are appointed because they need to govern from a where are we heading to, from a foresight perspective as opposed to a fear perspective.
No, thank you so much, Kantha. Thank you so much for this rich context. And it's really such a powerful, really explanation or powerful analysis, rather, what is really going on really in the state of governance. But, that, because what I also hear you say is that when boards operate from fear rather than insight, or foresight rather, they become reactive, right? Instead of strategic, So, but then one would ask is that, how big or how wide is this problem? Are we not maybe overstating it or exaggerating it? What is your view on this?
I don't think it's overstated and exaggerated. When you see something hit the headlines, you've got to ask yourself, who's been steering the ship here? And who is making those, and what information are they using to make that decision? So for me, if you have somebody that's constantly scanning and looking and understanding where this comes from and where we're heading to, they will not get involved operationally, because they know that they've got somebody there that can hold the feet to the fire. Because that's the whole point, right? We want to make sure that the person that we've put in charge does their work, but we are constantly looking at the next thing as the board. So I think it's also about the board having confidence. It's also about the board understanding this is my role, and the board chair steering that board in that direction. Because if the board chair is chair is wanting to be operational, the entire board gets taken down that garden path. So I think if you're serving on a board, whilst you serve with many other people and you serve under a chair, if you find yourself in a position where the board's going down the garden path, you must stand up and you must say so. And you must say, if we are being operational, let's step off it, because the discussion has now gone into whether we buy 10 pens or 5 pens. That's not our role here. Our role is to say, well, the price of pens are changing because pens are now being replaced by electronic pens, or whatever the case may be. So that becomes more expensive discussion to have, because you're not going to buy a big pen for 10 rand. You're going to buy a Apple pen for your tablet for 1,000, however, 3,000 rand. So that's the strategy, and getting into the meat.
No, thank you for that. Let's continue, and let's enter now a segment that we've termed the campus versus the war room, right? And let's then really unpack this metaphor, Kantha, because the boardroom, we're saying that is not a war room, it is a campus, yeah? So what does this mean in practical terms for board members and executives alike?
So what is a compass? A compass gives us north, south, east, west. A compass generally points to true north. Your true north is generally a thing that takes you down a straight line. It gets you to a certain point, etc., etc. So for me, a compass provides direction. It doesn't provide decisions about the route. The decisions about the route to get to true north comes from executive management, so CE and his or her team. So if a board constantly says, if we're sitting here, we're making a decision, where we're heading to, what's our true north, you will stay out of the fray of getting into operations. So a boardroom is not a war room. A war room is a place where you're constantly reactive. The war room is what's happening operationally. It's where the CEO and the COO and the CFO and the marketing people and some big thing has happened. COVID has hit, which we've had. And now you've got to make a big turnaround, and you've got to go digital, and you don't have a digital strategy. So I'll give you an example. I sat on a board during COVID. And so we were doing things traditionally. We were very, very traditional in people walking in the door, telephone calls, emails, all of those things. And in those days, the CE and I had a very close relationship. So it was the day when the president made the announcement. He contacted me 10:30 at night, messaged me and said, I need to speak, Chair, because operationally, we've got to make this decision. I said, sure. He called me and he said, we are going digital. We are going online. And I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. And I said, okay, sure. And do we have the tools? And he said, yes, you've provided us with the tools. Over the period of time, the board has put budget, and we've used the budget, and we were at 90%. We would have appreciated to have waited another sort of 6 months or so, but now this has got to be done now. So I said to him, look, let's go for it. Let's make your decision. I've got to go to the board. The board's got to take the resolution because you're changing operations. We're going online. And that's what he did. He went online the next day. We took 60 people off site. They had what they needed to have to continue working. And the year ran smoothly to the extent that that first board meeting in March was run online. So we were the compass. We were the people who had put the things in place previously. And we had said, here's the tool, here's the money to go get the tools. Now you take this and you steer, and we will help you steer the ship, provided you do what you need to do, not reactively, but proactively, because COVID, we went down for 3 months, and some people we had to be support services, and we had to work, etc., etc. So the decisions about the route to get to our true north were being taken every day on the ground by that CE and his team, and he would report daily, twice a day, if it needs to be, and I would then take that information and pass it on to the board and say, this is where we're heading to, or we're needing to release some money because what we thought we had in terms of hardware and load shedding and all of the other things that may have been happening at that time, we may need to plug some money in. So for me, a war room is tactical, it's not reactive. So if you think about it, when we're looking at tactics, we're looking at how we're going to get to the end. We're not looking at making we're not reacting to the emergency thing that the president has put out for COVID. And a war room is immediate. It's got to be done now. But if the board's going to say what's going to be done in the next 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, all of those sort of things. So it means, the board stays and says, okay, our eyes are on, our hands are off, because the hands are the executive team, but our eyes are constantly scanning and saying, oh, but there's a thing called vaccines that is coming now. How does that affect our workforce? Come speak to us. So for me, and your question was compass versus war room. The war room is operations. The compass is this board that says, you've given me the information, or you're constantly getting information and you're using that information to chart differently to bring you back to true north.
No, thank you so much for being so eloquent also in giving practical examples and real life experiences, just really to unpack this. Just then to summarize before we move on to the next segment, Kantha, is that, how I'm understanding this is that then, so the boardroom is where we set direction. That's why when we say that it's a compass, it's not where we debate tactics. It's where we safeguard purpose, we clarify vision, and hold leadership accountable as well, really, without crossing into their lane as far as operations and execution is concerned. That's what I'm hearing as we have explained this so well as well.
And Pam, let me interject. Boards that spend their time on urgent stuff forget the important stuff. So if it's urgent, and the board needs to come in, the COVID example I gave is perfect. The board needed to come in because the CE was charting in a direction. We needed to come in to be informed, but we are not reacting. We had what we had in place. So it was urgent, but it was the CE's job, not our job. The important job was to make sure what's coming, so that we are steering to stick to true north.
No, thank you for this. So let's move on, so that we'll also get a bit of time to engage our audience and everyone that has joined us here today. And like I said earlier, Kantha, is that we'll also upload this recording onto our YouTube channel, which is called the Diversity Roundtable. And we really promote these conversations to the wider African audience in East, West, and Central Africa, as well as the wider Southern Africa, region. So I'm just really, really so excited because, like I said earlier, that this is a timely and a much needed conversation because it does really affect and impact, how leaders show up. And also for, young people and as we progress as well in our career, sometimes we are not prepared, right? And when we get leadership roles or executive roles, and we find ourselves in boardrooms and we really don't know, what is right, what is wrong, maybe because we haven't been fully prepared or we haven't received sufficient training and we just, there in the boardroom, timid and like a deer caught in headlights, not knowing what to do, but also with the entrepreneurs that are running their businesses and profitable businesses, what are some of the things that they need to look out for rather as their businesses grow, so that they allow the people that they employ down the line, so that they're not always meddling into operations because they are the founder of the business. Yeah,
it's a very good. I want to give a small story about governing, and in your family, who governs what. You govern your family, you govern your daughter, because you've got to set down the rules. So there's governance at the level of a family. So let's take an entrepreneur, and we deal with them every day. I work in small business. I've worked in it for 25 years. They make the widgets, and when they come to you, they make the widgets, they do the accounting, they do the banking, they do the logistics, they do the marketing, and they're all over the place. But they're governing this business. And then the other people come on. And so now the small business has grown, and there are people who are now the doers. So who are operations. And so the governing, the founder has to step back, because if he or she doesn't step back, the doing doesn't get done, because you're constantly wanting to. I mean, I also have another analogy. I'm an accountant, like I said, for my sins. And I used to stand behind my clerks and I used to watch them doing Excel spreadsheets. And I was governing, but then I'd want to go and interject. And that's the wrong thing to do, because there's so many ways you can put out an Excel spreadsheet, right? And you can get to what you need to. But I'd say put the date first and put the month next and put year next, and that's the wrong thing to do, because you must
painful
govern
for them, right?
Because now you've got this micromanager behind you, and it screams distrust, and you want to give people an opportunity to grow and learn. And so now over my years of training within my own accounting firm for young professional accountants and graduates, I've learned to just govern, to sit back and say, you give me the solution, tell me how to do this. So I won't tell you how to set up an Excel spreadsheet, but you see it in many walks of life. But I think my one thing I want to talk about is that we mustn't get blurred, or we mustn't get confused by what people put out as governance. Oh, it's corporate governance. It's corporate governance. Governance is guiding. And they stick the word corporate before it, and it now makes it more impressive than anything else. But all it is simply guiding, which then scales upward depending on what sort of frameworks you use. But we'll cover that. We'll cover that just now.
No, thank you so much. I just love, how vulnerable you are as well, because I think you just demonstrated that, also life is a journey. We need to, learn, relearn, upskill, unlearn as well, so thank you so much. But then, your example, it also then leads us to the next segment that we have termed, when boards cross the line, and let's now really talk about real life implications when boards cross that operational line, what happens to the leadership morale? What happens to the innovation as well as accountability?
Yeah. Look, it's an undermining of leadership, right? Because like I said, who appoints the CE? The board. And the CE is accountable to the board. And so when that line is crossed, it becomes it's an undermining of the trust you've put into that position. So number one, if you don't trust the people that you've put into the position and you don't have that type of relationship where you can, you can say what you have to say, yes or no, and be very straightforward about it, you're not going to get anywhere. So for me, the trust factor is very important in board and management relationships. I had a comment once somebody said to me, we don't see this often. We don't see a CEO and a chair being friends. And I said, why must we not be friends? We must be friends for the right reasons, not to steal from the organization, but to be on the same journey, because what he or she is doing and what we are doing as a group of people, board and management, need to chart their way to the same end result. So, and we see this post-COVID as well, right? You don't really know people because they sit on screens and there's no touch and feel, and how do you know somebody? And I'll bring something in here from me personally. So I'm an alumni of an organization called the United World Colleges Movement globally.
Yeah.
35 years ago, I had a full scholarship and I went to Canada and I studied and I had a wonderful experience, most transformative catalytic thing in my life. And that education system is built on the teachings of Kurt Hahn, who is a German philosopher. And he speaks about how do you know somebody? How will you get to engender peace and harmony in the world? The only way you can do this is if you get to know each other and you get to understand each other. And we can only understand each other if we live with each other or we interact with each other more. So when you talk about people being, them and us, already you understand each other, and your confirmation biases and all of these other things come into play. So for me, the micromanagement kills leadership. It kills your strategic focus and your strategic drive as well. Because when people get second guessed, they're not going to be wanting to do any work. They're not going to trust you. I mean, it works both ways. If you don't trust them, they don't trust you. So it's about winning. It's winning the trust, but it's also making sure that executive management and executives continue being engaged. And this type of crossing the line results in a lot of disengagement. And so you see that them and us mentality. For me, people make organizations, and it's about people, us understanding who the people are and how they interact. Post-COVID, we had this. We had this even during COVID, because people didn't know how to deal with online. I mean, now we're so okay with it. We send a Zoom link and you do a 5-minute meeting or a 5-hour meeting. But I remember my first board meeting was online during COVID, and it was an 8.5 hour board meeting. I said to them, come in your slops and the shorts if you want to, because nobody is seeing us. We're seeing each other, but we're sitting to make these decisions. And that was an 8.5 hour board meeting around. But we had to get it finished because according to the board calendar, we had to move it forward, right? And it was difficult because we were not now we're taken out of our comfort zone. So for me, crossing that line also, when management looks at you and they go, but they don't really trust us, and now they're wanting to double check and they're wanting to put their fingers in and go drill down to how many pens I need to buy, etc. It results in management saying, so why must I be innovative? Because if I put in my innovation and my thought process and thinking into this, the board's going to come wipe us out the water anyway. So what's the point? So it kills that innovation and the curiosity and all of the other things we need to see in businesses every day. And if we kill innovation, then that whole risk-taking appetite that businesses need to have, you need to take some risk. You need to take calculated risks. But management's not going to do that, right? Because they're going to say that we're going to be second-guessed by the board. But how do we restore that balance? So if you're on a board and you're finding that there's this impasse in terms of us going forward and, the board's stepping in, sometimes management puts up their hand and makes some really like bold calls, and sometimes they get smacked for it. But for me, I believe that if you put it out there and you say, come, let's get around the table and solve it, it's the one way of getting past that sort of situation. I think that boards also don't understand role clarity. So I'm the board, and there's a communication policy. And if the communication policy says I should not be speaking to the marketing manager, I should not be speaking to the marketing manager, because the comms need to go by the executive office, or whatever the comms are in that organization. So there needs to be much more credence being given to things like board charters, policies, management charters. So everybody toes that. I'm not saying we need to be black and white. We need to still be human beings. But we need to ensure that those frameworks that have been created to take care of those things are exercised. We also need to make sure there's something called, and I do this in my business in GovNex. So we talk about the board evaluation. It's not a board evaluation, it's a governance evaluation. And the governance evaluation is a 360, which looks at both management as well as the board. And it says, how are we faring? We've ticked all the boxes, we're compliant, all of these things. But how are we testing our boundaries and behaviors? So are we just doing a little form that says tick, 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 everything, happy, sad, there's those 3-4 things at the top, happy, sad, and sort of in between? Or are we actually doing a 360 where we're getting each of us to rate each other? We're getting the governance expert in to come actually observe. I was at a board for a board, what they thought they needed was a board facilitation, and that whole thing showed that they actually don't talk to each other. So they don't even know each other. But they're all saying this is the problem. And I'm like, no, actually you're the problem because you're not speaking. And let me be a little bit bold to say, you guys will have to take a step back and have some training and some learning and development put into your space in terms of charters, boundaries, acceptable and non-acceptable behaviors. Like if you don't pitch up for a meeting, if you don't tell me you're not pitching up for a meeting, how do I even know you're interested in being on the board or management's interested in being in this meeting? So it works both ways. That line is very easy to cross, and it's about having authentic trust conversations between management and the board.
No, thank you so much. And because I'm glad that you are touching on role clarity, you are also touching on education and training for boards, right? I mean, even things that are as obvious as the Companies Act, and it's very important that really continuous learning and education for boards becomes, part and parcel of the governance and strategy. I know that it is, but we need to state it, because in some boards, some individuals don't receive their training. And I mean, we've seen it in my experience as well, But, I think moving on, how do we then, in this last segment, before we go into Q&A with our audience here today, and the people that have joined us, so how do we reclaim the campus? What is the future of board leadership? So if we were to reset the campus today, Kantha, what would the future ready boardroom look like to you?
Yeah. So I think we have a few things to traverse in terms of the future ready boardroom, because we've got all sorts of other things coming down the line, AI, agentics, Bitcoins, and things that are just sound like they're not fathomable. You can't I can't join them at all, because it's something that's so foreign to me. But I think from a future perspective, we need to hone in on the human side of things. So your humanity, your humbleness, your ability to interact with people and know people is very important from a future board perspective. And looking at the horizon. So take us back to before we even knew COVID and masks and all of the other protocols we followed. Go to 2015, 2016, 2017. Was any board, in terms of their risk register or their scanning of the horizon, do you think any board sat there and said, what do you think if we had something that shut the world down? We'd never ever thought of it, right? It happened that when it was reported that December, we went into lockdown in March. It took 6, 8, 10 months out of our lives, and some people treated it differently. I mean, you look at some of the nations; it was done very, very differently. So boards need to also understand that if they're not constantly scanning, if they're fearful of AI, if they're fearful of change, because the only constant in life is change, right? So if you're not sitting and looking at how things are changing in your environment, and I have people who say, oh, AI is not going to enter here. AI will be there. It's about walking next next to AI, knowing how you use it as a tool, and don't allow it to use, for you to be fanned up against it. So for me, I think safety of people as they express themselves, because I said you need to be bold sometimes to say in an organization, this is not working, we're not having honest conversation, and we need to trust each other more. I don't think the boards of the future are about sitting and looking at reports and ticking and saying, oh, we've complied, our annual returns are in, our tax returns are in, and, Bob's our uncle. I think the boards of the future are going to be more conversational. They're going to be think deeper from an emotion perspective, because the decisions they're making are going to be, not that the decisions they're making now are not affecting people, but they're going to be making those decisions with machines next to them. So AI and that sort of thing next to them. I think also good governance, if we have good governance in place, and that's all round, not just the compliance side, it's about heart, mind, soul, psychological safety, all of those things. Good governance engenders trust, is an architecture of trust. So if you do things correctly and you live the vision and mission that sits on your wall, you will be a future-focused organization. I think also from a values and ethics perspective, because we've seen so many people cross those lines, right? So if your values are that you're not going to, as an organization, dump into the river, you stick to that. And it means that then you're on that journey to help people and purpose and planet and profit and everything else that we hear all the buzzwords about ESG, etc. So I think the boards of the future are going to be more human-centered, human-focused, understanding that we're going to have machines alongside us being able to make decisions and mimic our decision making, because we see what's happening with agentics, etc. So I think really from a future perspective is to ensure that if you're getting into a board role, you are taking heed of foresight strategies, understanding, working on your own critical thinking, and being discerning about what you're accepting in terms of information, because information is so freely available. But is the information right? And is it ethical? And is it, are we making transparent decisions? That sort of thing.
No, that's really, really incredibly insightful, Kantha. And I mean, I can actually just really, understand and relate really to the depth of your experience in this field, and especially in this topic, because it really reminds us that good governance is not about control. It's really about clarity. It's about character. It's also about courage, and also that boards lead with those principles don't just direct organizations, they shape nations, they shape communities, and they shape the world, right? Because obviously there's also so much that's going on in the world. So I think all that we need from our leaders from a governance point of view is really clarity, character, and courage as well, not so much about control. So thank you so much for that. So let's enter into Q&A. It's just been me and you chatting away here, and let us not forget that we've got leaders and guests that have also joined in the call. And let's really take a few questions or a few reflections from our guests as well, and that have joined us. And really how I'd like to prompt them, I see that we've got two hands up already, like Dr. Pet and Karen, they've quickly raised their hands. But also before they unmute and ask the question, I just really also want to prompt them, where do they see boards crossing the line most often? And what would it take to restore the campus? So Dr. Pat, we'll start with you, seeing that your hand was up first, and then we'll move over to Kiran.
That was fantastic, really. I wish we had more time. But I want to comment on two things. In the interest of time, why boards steps into management? Sometimes it is because critical information has been concealed. And maybe we need to discuss that when you are a board and you have a sense that there's certain information that should be forthcoming to make a particular decision, but that information is not coming. That's one. Number two, what happens when board crosses the line? And for me, there are two things to add. One is the loss of psychological safety. And Pam, once you lose psychological safety between board and management, you are pretty much done. Let me allow my colleague Kiran to come in the interest of time. I thank you.
Thank you for your insights, Dr. Pett. You are spot on. Psychological safety is key in any relationship, even in home settings. So thank you so much for that context. Then we've got Miss or Mrs. Kiran Maharaj. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And I think thank you to Kantha. Kantha's insights on everything are always so profound. So thank you very much, Kantha, as usual. Maybe just also two comments from my side. I've got many, but let me just maybe make two. So the first one is, you pointed out this issue of the skills that a board needs. I think the first step and the biggest maturity is for boards to actually understand what they're there for in the business, which you've outlined very well, but also what a business needs. And, today I was looking at a vacancy for the Johannesburg Ballet Company. And, you think to yourself, I'm a hard technical person. What can I do for ballet? But, there's the balance around process, financial management, oversight in terms of, delivery and that kind of thing. So then there is a deeper thinking that's required to match some of the transversal skills that we talk about these days to what is actually required in businesses. And I think that takes a level of maturity for recruitment and replacement agencies, as well as boards to see, where this fits. The second comment that I wanted to make is also something that you've mentioned, which I think is very close to my heart, is the age gap. If the boards are only going to be old people, I think we are missing a huge opportunity as to how to bring young people into the fold. They think differently, they act differently, they do differently. And it's a big issue if we're only going to have a very, let's say, long-standing, maybe not call ourselves old, long-standing perspective on how organizations are governed. So I think for me, that's also a very critical point, being adaptive to this new way of thinking and contribution in an organization. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful, and we are just really, really so blessed to also have, leaders on this call that engage us, that really, point us in the right direction and ask some really thought-provoking and share some insights, on this topic. So, Kantha, coming back to you now, thank you so much for grounding this conversation in both truth and wisdom. So before we close off, you've also reminded us that governance is not an act of control, as we said earlier, but it is an act of stewardship. So before we close, do you maybe have like the closing notes or the last words that you'd like to leave our wider African audience that will be promoting this recording too over the next 2 weeks? Because, we're really gunning for not less than 5,000 views on our YouTube channel for this recording. So any last words from you?
So I think whenever and this is a constant question, right? I want to be on, so I see a lot of people saying, I want to be on a board, but you've got to understand the responsibility it takes to be on a board. And so to be on a board, I want you to be knowledgeable. I want you to be human. I want you to be ethical. I want you to be transparent. So if I look at where the world is heading with all the geopolitical issues, socioeconomic issues, etc., when you sit on a board, you make decisions that affect people's lives. And so if you're not constantly scanning the horizon, if you're not constantly learning, if you're not constantly leading by saying, I'm not going to be part of this decision, you're not being true to self. And so what I want to leave everybody here with today is that governing is an easy act if it's done from the heart, considering other people, considering people, profit, planet, considering that you are making a decision that changes the trajectory of an organization and people's lives.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think, this is where we say no more. Because all that we needed to say and here we have said it all. And I know that obviously this is also such a broad topic and we cannot fully unpack it in this just 1 hour that we have, but we just really like to thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom, and really thank you for your experience in sharing this much needed insights on this topic. So to everyone who has joined us today, thank you for engaging so deeply. And remember that the health of any organization depends on how well its board leads with vision and not ego. So until next time, let's keep leading with purpose. Let's keep leading with clarity. Let's keep leading with inclusion. And I am Pam Xaba, and I'm your host for the Diversity Roundtable. And we have had an amazing and an insightful discussion with our guest, Kantha Naicker, and who is the CEO of GovernX, and as well as the recently appointed board member for Inspire Growth, NPC. This really just sounds so good. Thank you so much, Kantha, for gracing us with your time and your presence. We are appreciated.
Thank you, Pam. Such a pleasure, and just happy to have such an honest, authentic conversation about governance and boards and war rooms and compasses.
Thank you so much. Thank you.